At the break of dawn over the barren outskirts of Vorkala, thick fog clung to the craggy hills like a shroud, concealing the movement of an enemy force that had silently encircled the town's garrison. The air was heavy with tension as the battalion, consisting of 450 soldiers, scrambled to assess their precarious position. Communications were dead, radio channels filled only with static, and the latest attempts to establish contact with headquarters had failed. The troops, seasoned yet visibly strained, braced themselves for the siege that was unfolding with ruthless precision. Captain Elena Ramirez stood near the command tent, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon where the first enemy patrols had already established forward positions. At 32, Elena was a figure of composed intensity, her dark hair pulled back tightly, revealing a face marked by both determination and the quiet confidence of experience. She had earned her stripes not through brute force, but through a reputation for strategic brilliance and an uncanny ability to remain calm under the harshest pressures. Recently promoted for her unconventional approaches in combat scenarios, Elena was a tactical officer whose ideas often challenged the rigid orthodoxy of military leadership. Raised in a family steeped in military tradition, Elena's childhood was suffused with stories of battles past and lessons in discipline. Her father, a retired general, had instilled in her a respect for the chain of command but also a belief that rules were only as good as the thinking behind them. At war colleges, she excelled academically, specializing in asymmetric warfare and guerrilla tactics, often clashing with instructors who dismissed her theories as too radical or unorthodox. Yet, her successes in simulated engagements and field exercises earned her grudging respect. Now, in the crucible of Vorkala's siege, those lessons were about to be tested in reality. The battalion's predicament was dire. The enemy was well-equipped and numerically superior, their forces having meticulously planned the ambush to cut off any hope of reinforcement or retreat. The town's defensive perimeter had been overrun in places, and supply lines severed. Soldiers crouched behind shattered walls and derelict vehicles, their faces grim as they checked empty magazines and whispered urgent orders. Morale wavered, but Elena refused to let despair take hold. She moved swiftly among the men, issuing calm but firm directives. Hold your positions. Conserve ammunition. Watch for movement on the eastern ridge. Her voice cut through the chaos, steady and measured, a beacon of resolve. Several younger officers looked to her for guidance, their eyes betraying the fear they tried to mask. Elena's presence was a reminder that leadership did not always come from rank alone, sometimes it emerged from clarity of mind and will. Inside the command tent, maps and satellite images were scattered across a battered table. Elena studied them intently, tracing the enemy's likely approach with her finger. Conventional defense plans had already failed. The pre-assigned fallback points were compromised, and standard protocols offered little hope against the overwhelming firepower and encirclement tactics the adversary had employed. It was clear that typical battlefield doctrine could not win this fight. Elena's mind raced as she considered alternatives. Her background in asymmetric warfare, learning to exploit the enemy's weaknesses rather than confront their strengths directly, provided a framework. Guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and misdirection might shift the momentum if executed with precision. But these required disciplined coordination and a willingness to take calculated risks that many of her peers found unsettling. The sun began to rise, casting a cold orange glow over the town's battered buildings. Enemy patrols tightened their grip, and sporadic gunfire echoed across the streets. A sniper's bullet shattered a nearby window, sending shards of glass raining down. The battalion's communication officer, his face pale, reported another failed attempt to reach command. Reinforcements were not coming. Elena's thoughts briefly flickered to her family. Her mother had always worried about her choosing a path so fraught with danger. But it was here, in moments like these, that Elena felt the full weight of her responsibility, not just to survive, but to lead. As the enemy's advance seemed to solidify, Elena gathered the officers for a rapid briefing. The tent was cramped, filled with the low murmur of tension and the rustling of maps. "Our current tactics won't hold," she began, her voice low but resolute. "We have to think beyond the textbook. The enemy is counting on us to stick to protocol, to be predictable. We won't give them that advantage." She outlined a plan that relied on exploiting the terrain around Vorkala, a mix of wooded hills and narrow passes that could serve as natural choke points. Instead of a static defense, the battalion would conduct a series of calculated countermaneuvers, decoys to lure enemy units into traps, small squads maneuvering rapidly to disrupt supply lines, and synchronized strikes designed to fracture the enemy's cohesion. Some officers exchanged uneasy glances. The risk was considerable, failure could mean total annihilation. Yet the alternative, waiting to be overrun, was unacceptable. Elena's calm resolve began to ripple through the room. She emphasized the importance of precise timing and communication, urging her team to adopt a flexible mindset. We'll use what we have, our knowledge of the land, our discipline, our will to survive. This fight isn't just about firepower. It's about outthinking the enemy. As the briefing concluded, Elena stepped outside the tent, the weight of command settling firmly on her shoulders. She watched as soldiers prepared their gear, exchanged last words, and steeled themselves. The siege had begun in earnest, but within the ranks, a spark of determination was igniting. In the distance, the enemy's armored vehicles rumbled forward, their engines muffled by the morning haze. Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself. The hours ahead would test every lesson she had learned, every ounce of her strategic acumen. Failure was not an option. With the battalion trapped, cut off, and facing overwhelming odds, Captain Elena Ramirez's unconventional mind was the last beacon of hope. The battle for Vorkala was not merely a clash of weapons, but a test of ingenuity and resolve, a crucible where the old rules would be challenged, and where the fate of hundreds depended on one leader's courage to think differently. The morning fog had lifted, revealing the battered streets of Vorkala still choked with dust and the stench of gunpowder. Captain Elena Ramirez stood at the center of a makeshift command post amid the ruins, her mind sharpened to a razor's edge. The enemy had tightened their noose, their forces encroaching with methodical precision, yet Elena refused to concede. The battalion's survival depended on turning the tables, and that meant she had to assume full command. Her superior officers were either incapacitated or cut off, and the chain of command fragmented under the relentless pressure. Without hesitation, Elena stepped into the void, her voice carrying authority that brooked no dissent. From this moment, I am in charge. We will not wait passively for defeat. Her words, calm but resolute, galvanized the officers and soldiers alike. Drawing upon her expertise in asymmetric warfare, Elena devised a counterattack that defied conventional expectations. The enemy, confident in their overwhelming numbers and firepower, had grown complacent. They believed the battalion trapped, disorganized, and ripe for the taking. Elena intended to exploit that overconfidence with precision and cunning. She ordered her limited forces to implement a network of decoy maneuvers. Small squads, lightly armed and highly mobile, would feign retreats in vulnerable positions, luring enemy patrols into carefully prepared ambush points. The wooded ridges and narrow passes surrounding Vorkala became a chessboard, with every hill and ravine mapped for tactical advantage. Communications were painstakingly maintained through runners and encrypted shortwave transmissions. Elena coordinated synchronized counterstrikes with clockwork timing, striking swiftly at enemy supply convoys and command posts before melting back into the terrain. These hit-and-run tactics sowed confusion and frustration among the attackers, who struggled to adapt to the battalion's unpredictable movements. Despite being outgunned and outnumbered, the battalion's morale began to shift. The soldiers, inspired by Elena's leadership and the tangible results of their efforts, found renewed determination. The enemy, previously advancing with swagger, now hesitated, their formations breaking under the pressure of unseen threats. On the eastern ridge, a detachment led by Lieutenant Marcus Chin set a trap that exemplified Elena's strategy. Pretending to abandon a defensive outpost, they left behind booby traps and false trails. When an enemy squad pursued them into the narrow valley below, hidden marksmen opened fire, decimating the attackers and forcing a chaotic retreat. Reports of similar ambushes filtered back to the command post, each one chipping away at the enemy's momentum. However, the battle was far from won. Midday brought the arrival of enemy reinforcements, fresh troops and armored vehicles pressing hard against the battalion's flanks. The pressure mounted, threatening to overwhelm their tenuous gains. Elena's calm under fire was tested anew as she adjusted plans on the fly, reallocating forces to reinforce vulnerable sectors and ordering counterattacks to stall the enemy's advance. In one critical moment, when a key supply depot was threatened, Elena personally coordinated the defense, directing fire teams and deploying reserves in a rapid, coordinated response. Her ability to read the battlefield, anticipate enemy moves, and inspire confidence proved decisive in holding the line. Throughout the day, Elena's command radiated a rare blend of discipline and adaptability. Her orders emphasized flexibility, soldiers were encouraged to improvise within the broader strategy, making decisions based on real-time conditions rather than waiting for rigid instructions. This decentralized approach contrasted sharply with the enemy's hierarchical command, which struggled to respond to the battalion's fluid tactics. Despite exhaustion and casualties mounting, the battalion's cohesion held firm. Elena made frequent rounds, speaking with soldiers directly, listening to their concerns and offering words of encouragement. Her presence on the front lines reinforced the message that every individual mattered in the fight. As dusk approached, the battalion had managed to dismantle much of the enemy's initial assault. The once confident attackers found themselves fragmented, their supply lines disrupted, and their morale shaken. Elena's gamble on unconventional tactics had paid off, but the battle was far from over. In the command tent, maps were redrawn to reflect the shifting front lines. Elena convened her officers again, emphasizing the need to maintain pressure and exploit the enemy's disarray. "They underestimated us," she said quietly, "and that is our advantage. We will keep them off balance. Every move must be calculated, every action purposeful." Her strategy demanded constant vigilance and swift adaptation. The enemy would regroup, and reinforcements could still tip the scales. But Elena's leadership had transformed a desperate defense into a dynamic counteroffensive, turning the battleground into a landscape of opportunity rather than inevitability. As night fell over Vorkala, the battalion prepared for the coming hours with cautious optimism. Soldiers fortified positions, tended to the wounded, and maintained weapons with grim determination. Elena remained at the heart of the operation, her mind already planning the next maneuvers. In these moments, the true measure of her command emerged, not just in tactics, but in the spirit she instilled. Where others might have seen only hopelessness, Elena saw potential. Where the enemy expected submission, she delivered resistance. The siege was still ongoing, but the tide had begun to turn, propelled by a leader who refused to accept defeat. As dawn broke over the battered town of Vorkala, the once impenetrable siege had been shattered. The enemy's forces, battered and disoriented, retreated in scattered columns, leaving behind smoldering vehicles and abandoned weaponry. Captain Elena Ramirez stood amid the ruins, her uniform smeared with dirt and sweat, eyes fixed on the horizon where the last pockets of resistance faded into the morning light. The battalion of 450 soldiers had defied overwhelming odds, breaking the siege through a combination of grit, ingenuity, and relentless will. The battle had been brutal. Elena's unconventional tactics, decoys, ambushes, and rapid counterstrikes, had systematically dismantled the enemy's advance, turning terrain and surprise into deadly weapons. Despite being outgunned and outnumbered, the battalion had reclaimed control of Vorkala, not through brute force, but through strategic brilliance and adaptability. The victory was hailed as nothing short of miraculous by those who witnessed it. Back at the military command center, reports of the turnaround sparked intense debate. Elena's unorthodox methods challenged long-held doctrines focused on conventional warfare and rigid hierarchies. Senior officers, initially skeptical of her approach, found themselves compelled to reassess their strategies in light of the battalion's success. Military leadership convened special sessions to analyze the operation, dissecting every decision and maneuver to understand how a trapped force had reversed its fate. The discussions underscored a critical shift in doctrine. Elena's emphasis on flexibility, decentralized decision-making, and terrain exploitation resonated with a new generation of strategists who recognized that future conflicts would rarely fit neatly into traditional models. The victory at Vorkala became a case study in adaptive warfare, demonstrating the power of intellect and innovation over sheer force. For Elena, the recognition was both gratifying and sobering. Though praised for her leadership, she remained acutely aware that success in war was often fleeting and costly. Her promotion to strategic advisor came with the responsibility of shaping the military's future approach to combat. She was tasked with leading training programs designed to instill her principles: rapid decision-making under duress, creative problem-solving, and the courage to deviate from orthodox tactics, in officers across various units. Her training sessions were rigorous and immersive, combining classroom instruction with simulated battlefield scenarios that emphasized unpredictability and adaptability. Elena encouraged her students to think like the enemy, to read the terrain like a living map, and to trust their instincts when traditional rules failed. Her mantra, born from hard-won experience, became a guiding philosophy: adaptability is the ultimate weapon. Beyond tactical lessons, Elena's success also challenged cultural norms within the military. As a woman who had risen through the ranks by defying expectations, her prominence paved the way for greater acceptance of diverse leadership styles and voices. She became a symbol of resilience and innovation, inspiring others to push boundaries in uniformed service. The aftermath of the siege saw a gradual but unmistakable evolution in military thought. Units across the armed forces began incorporating Elena's principles into their doctrines, training regimens, and operational planning. Commanders learned to balance discipline with flexibility, encouraging initiative at all levels. The old paradigms of rigid command structures gave way to more dynamic and responsive frameworks better suited for the complexities of modern warfare. Elena's influence extended beyond the battlefield. She authored papers and contributed to strategic forums, advocating for a military culture that valued creativity and diversity. Her story was shared widely, becoming a touchstone for leadership programs and war colleges alike. The battalion's victory at Vorkala was no longer just a tactical success, it was a turning point in how war was understood and waged. Among the soldiers who had fought under her command, Elena's legacy was deeply personal. Many credited her calm decisiveness and trust in their abilities for their survival. The bonds forged in the crucible of siege and counterattack endured long after the guns fell silent. Veterans spoke of her as a leader who saw them as more than mere instruments of war, someone who believed in their strength and potential. Though the scars of battle lingered, the triumph at Vorkala stood as a testament to what could be achieved when intellect and adaptability met unyielding resolve. Elena Ramirez's story became a beacon for future generations of military leaders, a reminder that victory often belongs not to the strongest, but to those who dare to think differently, act decisively, and inspire others to do the same.